Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Draulon Joe Talk CS. It's an esports podcast we kicked off a few weeks ago. And joining us tonight, after a brief back and forth with Navi in the ESL Pro League, is Valde, Danish CSGO prodigy and rifler for North. Valde, how are you doing?
I'm fine, and you?
We're doing fine. It's always like a late night entertainment here, so we are all ready for the ride. Joining me also is Joe Cardoli, Tolkien. You might also know him as Tolkien Fanatic, my partner in crime, and my name is Balázs Lengyel, also known as Draulon, and I am also hosting the podcast. Now, Valde, I don't know how much time you had to pay attention to the Open Qualifiers drama that went on a few days ago, but you probably noticed the whole deal with a few players from relatively unknown teams got handed a few cheating bans during the online qualifiers for the minor, and that kind of kicked off a discussion on Reddit and Twitter about the efficiency of these online qualifiers. Could you just share with us your opinion, your viewpoint on this whole thing?
Yeah, I think, we were at ELEAGUE when part of the minor qualifications happened, and it's from the outside it just seemed like the whole thing was one big mess. People were getting banned left and right. There was a lot of delays, there was client problems, server problems, so basically it seemed like one of the worst qualifiers ever hosted, in my opinion. And just from speaking to some fellow Danish players and from what I could read on Reddit and Twitter and so on, so I think one of the big issues that I also saw Thorin and Richard Lewis were talking about is that once you host these open qualifiers, you basically just open the floodgates to all sorts of shitty teams, teams not being serious, people coming late to a match, and it also just seemed like Sivu was just pretty much getting overloaded. They weren't used to hosting this big of a qualifier, and just that in itself is a huge problem to me, because this is one of the most important qualifiers there is in the entirety of CSGO, and I think it just exposes a lot of problems we have in the CSGO scene currently that isn't isn't discussed on an everyday basis, because these qualifications of course only happens twice a year, since we only have 2 majors per year. So yeah, I think it was just a big mess, and I think it's really unfortunate, because I actually feel like it's one of the few chances unknown teams or upcoming players got to show their potential. So it's really sad that it doesn't have to be about maybe upcoming talents, but all about delays and bans and people cheating and so on. So I think it's just really sad and unfortunate in the end.
Yeah, and the thing is that you also had to question, how much effort CEO actually put into this, because I remember something there was actually only one admin who was paying attention to the games, and he went out to get some noodles halfway through, so there's that. But as you pointed out, that it is actually one of the most important qualifiers out there, because for many players it means, this is the opportunity to make it to the major through the whole minor qualifier system. So what I wanted to ask you is, obviously you come from a similar background, with Heroic and earlier on some other lesser known teams where you also had to grind your way through these qualifiers. From your experience, did you have anything similar? Did you experience anything similar to what happened here?
From what I can recall, I don't think we ever experienced anything this bad. But we definitely played a lot of open qualifiers and closed qualifiers as well. And I think in pretty much every single one of them, actually, we always had some sort of delay or problem with the anti-cheat client, or people from the other team turning up late, and admins not being strict enough to enforce their own rules, and just client crashes and all sorts of issues. So I don't think it was anything this bad, but we definitely always experienced some kind of trouble, and it just seems like these organizers aren't prepared for these qualifiers, because it's the same problems every single time. I mean, I can just go onto the Dust 2 forum, the Danish HLTV basically, and every time there's been some sort of open qualifier, I can see tons of people whining about bad admins, delays, anti-cheat not working, other team is cheating. I mean, all these issues, and it just never seems to change. So I think something has to be done, and I think it should be pretty drastic actually. I think you should meet some kind of requirements before you can even sign up to the qualifiers. So like whether it's already participating in some kind of league, or like your Steam account has to be X amount of days old or whatever, because like this would already just there filter a lot of people away. That's like these guys, Germans for example, with 10 hours on their Steam account, almost spin butting in the game. I mean, this could easily be avoided in my opinion without having to do anything special. So I think a lot can be done in these open qualifiers to make them better for not just the organizers but also for the players.
You kind of talked about how these big open qualifiers, especially for the major, because there's so many eyes on them, bring out a lot of problems that aren't discussed kind of on a regular basis. Can you kind of elaborate on what specifically some of those problems are that you think, or did you kind of address a lot of them in your previous statement?
I think I already addressed a lot, but I think a glaring issue is the anti-cheat. I mean, we can just take a recent example as well. Like when we had to qualify for ECS, we played a match versus Space Soldiers online, and I think 2 days before the match, or like the same day maybe, Despe got banned on ESL for cheating. That actually turned out to be a wrong ban, so I'm not discrediting Despe in any sense, but 2 of the Space Soldiers players had problems getting on the anti-cheat. So not only were we like almost an hour delayed because of them not being able to get onto the anti-cheat, but then we also actually had to play the whole match like without anti-cheat. So because 2 of their players didn't like couldn't get the anti-cheat working, the whole match had to be played without anti-cheat. And I mean, obviously we just agreed to it, but already there I think it's kind of outrageous, because then you basically have an issue with 2 people and you make it like a 10-man issue, because we had no issues. And it's like, sure, I could understand from Space Soldier's point of view that's like a sad situation, but I'm like in that sense I think it should honestly be like a walkover them, or the match should be rescheduled to another day. Because if you can just say that a player has a problem with the anti-cheat and the admins are like, alright, we'll just turn it completely off, then what the fuck is the point with having anti-cheat? So that's the recent example I can give you.
Yeah, I mean, you also bring up the fact that, you know, Despe was banned on ESL, but then could play, you know, on Faceit AC, and we kind of had an exchange on Twitter when these qualifiers were going around about how, you know, the need for a shared ban list across services, and like, obviously I think that people can agree that in concept it's a good idea, but I mean, in practice, very hard to pull off without the support and aid from Valve, which frankly doesn't seem to be anywhere around the horizon. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think you just touch on one of the most important points, and that's like the interaction with Valve. Because I mean, every time we have these issues, even regarding some of their own tournaments, like the minor, I just hear nothing from Valve. It's like there's no communication. They have no community manager who's like consistently like communicating through Reddit or Twitter or whatever. And I just think it creates a lot of like I think a lot of people get mad and feel like they're not getting listened to, and then they have to vent their frustration like somewhere else, or like have to try and enforce rules on their own. So one of my biggest wishes for the future is that Valve becomes this like much more communicative owner of a game, because sometimes you don't even know like who you're playing for in the end. I mean, we're doing this as our full-time job, so basically at some point Valve has like some people's livelihood in their hands, so we never know what they're gonna change tomorrow or the day after, and it just creates this whole uncertain situation where you can't like rely on what they're doing, because it's so inconsistent in my opinion, compared to, for example, Riot, who seems like a much more like, not necessarily better, because I know there's been a lot of problems with Riot, but at least they manage their own game and communicate somewhat decently from what I can understand from the outside, without being like an expert on League of Legends in any matter.
It's good you bring Valve up, because we're actually going to touch on Valve and your opinion on them later on in the podcast. But right now I want to kind of go back and discuss, you know, the whole anti-cheat thing, because the community, for example, is really split on this because some of them want like a more intrusive anti-cheat, for example, what ESEA has, and then the other half is like, maybe we should like find a better alternative to that. And from a professional player's perspective, on your experience, what do you think an anti-cheat should actually do in a more detailed?
Yeah, I think first of all you have to look at it from two different perspectives. So on one hand, you can't be complaining that an anti-cheat is not catching people if you on the other hand won't let it be somewhat intrusive. So this is like the first thing people have to realize. You can't just scream about the anti-cheat not being effective if you at the same time won't allow it to like actually scan files or whatever it has to do on your computer. So I don't know if this is like a final suggestion, but something I thought about, and this is just like a shower thought or whatever, is that you could maybe have two different back clients going on. So one would just be for the casuals playing matchmaking or whatever, and then you could have like a second back system that you should only enable, kind of like ESEA, for when you had to play these like important qualifications for the minor, whatever it might be a solution to me. And then like when you're a pro player, you would obviously agree to having a more intrusive client for the sake of people not cheating in the end. That would be totally fine with me. Like I'd have no issue whatsoever in them scanning stuff on my computer, as long as it doesn't like interfere with like super personal stuff.
Yeah, that's actually something that I've brought up before on either a previous podcast or on Twitter, is the fact that at some point there has to be an opt-in, more intrusive client if you're playing at any level where you can be earning money from it, in my opinion. At the very least, it should be for these minor qualifiers where you have to opt in. But once again, we get back to the issue of Valve, right? That, there's so many solutions, or there's so many problems where the solution has to come through Valve, right? And once again, they don't communicate. It doesn't seem like they really care at all. So unfortunately right now we can theorize all we want, but it seems like these solutions are just never going to materialize, which is frustrating. I'm sure it's frustrating for you as well. Do you think that opinion of that more intrusive anti-cheat would be shared by the majority of your fellow pros? Do you think most of them would be okay with that?
It's actually something that I didn't actually speak with a lot of people about, but I definitely think so, like from in my opinion. But one of the things that's wrong with Valve, in my opinion as well, is the fact that we don't hear anything. Like if we just at least heard some sort of statement, like for example after this qualifier, that at least we're looking into things, or like wanting to make changes, or we're looking into making our anti-cheat better or whatever, that would actually give us some slight hope. But we hear nothing. Like it's just complete dead silence, and nobody's commentating on anything from Valve's side. And I think it's actually kind of disturbing that you could, because I'm sure they care actually, because we've seen in the past that they're actually pretty swift about people like match fixing or actually getting back banned. Then there's no mercy, but we just hear nothing after these incidents, and I actually think it's quite disturbing.
Yeah, we apologize about that. Production experienced some technical difficulties, but we are back on track. So we're kind of talking about the whole platforms, anti-cheats, and this is where we had to bring up, the whole Civo thing at ELEAGUE, where might not necessarily be Civo's fault, but their client broke down and you couldn't, you didn't manage to take pauses in your game against FaZe. So that kind of leads to the question, what should a server platform like this actually have in order to make an enjoyable experience?
So from my point of view, when I've tried to play on the various clients like FaZe, Civo, ESC, and so on, I actually think the clients are pretty good overall. I don't think we have too many issues, but what happened at ELEAGUE was actually quite extraordinary from what I could understand from the admins and from Vincico when we spoke to him after the game. So what basically happened was, like, when one of the FaZe players had a monitor issue, and when they wanted to pause the game, it happened like after the freeze time. So when they had to back up the server and restart it, something in the iCloud or the cloud server where they store their backup files broke. So when they tried to reload the server, they had some kind of package loss that they couldn't like fix, and that ended up happening to take like 45 minutes or something. And when we just said like, let's just play from 0 to 0, like screw the scoreboard, the vanilla server they had as a backup were way too slow to get set up, and they didn't know the proper commands, and it was just all a big mess. But I mean, I think it was a very unfortunate situation, and I'm sure that ELEAGUE will have a fix for it the next time. And it's obviously just really unfortunate that it happened in this of an important game, like a semi-final at ELEAGUE. But like, there's no point just me sitting here bashing Cibo about it, because obviously they didn't want this stuff to happen. So you also have to give them a break. But yeah, hopefully that stuff won't happen again in the future.
Yeah, so speaking of ELEAGUE, the special thing about ELEAGUE, right, is it's an entire league that is run on LAN, and you and some other people have kind of been calling for more and more of these, more stages of these qualifiers to be played on LAN. Is that somewhere that you think we could be moving soon? I mean, what are the kind of upsides and downsides of doing that?
I don't think we'll be moving there anytime soon. I think there's still too much online stuff going on in the Counter-Strike world for it to be completely moving to LAN, and I'm also not sure that it's even like feasible in the end. But I definitely think there's a lot of upside to LAN. I mean, a lot of people forget about like the whole player experience as well. Like, from these unknown players, if they get the chance to go to a LAN in a foreign country, it brings like a whole new experience to the thing of playing Counter-Strike. I mean, you get to meet new people, you get to meet some of the pro players that you maybe look up to. The whole LAN experience of traveling and being in a foreign country and having fun. I mean, some of the most memorable moments in my career, at least, is actually not from the biggest LANs like Katowice and so on. It's actually from some of the smaller Danish events and Canadian events we attended at the beginning of Heroics. So I think that's also a thing that you need to keep in mind. So sure, the cost might be higher of like sending people to a LAN, but at the same time, I think it's feasible if you like put some restriction and limits on some of these open qualifiers, so it's not a massive amount of like 500 teams participating. So you have to cut it down if possible.
Well, a team that won't be going to LAN, or at least to a minor, is Dignitas. They had a hellish run through the European qualifier, including a very early clash with Havu, who were seeded an abysmally low 128th. And this was kind of a problem that we saw throughout the qualifiers, is kind of seeding was all over the place to, like, just, I don't want to say wildly inaccurate, but that's kind of what happened. And again, you talk about how this is the biggest event on the Counter-Strike calendar, and like, these mistakes just can't happen. So how do we avoid that happening? How do tournament organizers prevent these things from happening?
I mean, obviously it's almost near important to seed 500 different teams, but what you could do, and what my suggestion would be, is just to have a simple look at the HLTV top 50 or something, and then you take all of those 50 teams and seed them, so you avoid these early matchups where two of the favorites meet in the round of 2 or something, because that's like unacceptable, because these teams only get a chance twice a year to qualify for a minor, and if they have to face these, like, not only are they facing like cheaters and people coming late to the game and admins not being there and so on, but if they also have to face some of the best teams in the early rounds, that just might kill a whole team actually, and you might actually split up because the minor results are so bad. So it's actually also something that outright kills teams if they do bad at minors. So I think this whole system just needs to be improved at the end.
And what do you think about the fact that this time around there was literally one qualifier for each region, whereas in the past we've seen up to 4 different open qualifiers for Europe and a handful for the other regions?
I mean, it's always, I understand that the minor and the majors should be like a tough road to get through, and that's actually completely fine with me, but only having one qualifier seems too little to me, and also Europe not having more more spots when it's like clearly without a question the best region in the game is also actually quite unacceptable to me. I mean, I get the whole Valve thing that they want to like spread the game throughout various regions of the world and trying to induce new players to come to the game and like trying to get Asia on board. That's all good and fine with me, but I don't think the level of the Asian region, for example, grants these free spots as it is at the moment. I think you should be giving EU more teams or like spots for teams because it's like clear the best region, and I'm sure that if some of these teams from the CIS region or the Asian region would compete in the EU qualifiers, I actually think they would have a chance to qualify. To be honest.
Yeah, it's definitely a fair point, and that's a point that people have brought up before about kind of there has to be an overhaul of the entire system as far as slot allocation and formatting and all that sort of things. And we have seen it where in the bigger regions we did see kind of larger closed qualifiers, right? There was a 6-team closed qualifier in Europe and a 16-team closed qualifier in North America. I kind of, like you, share the opinion that we should have a 16-team minor in Europe. Because you see all these teams that aren't even making it to the minor, and there's something like 3 top 15 teams that they're just major chances are shot. Your former running buddies in Heroic being one of them. So yeah, I think that it's unacceptable, and I wish I could say that it looks like it will change soon, but once again, we have no idea.
Yeah, the design of this whole system actually kind of comes down to Valve in the end, because I believe they're the ones who kind of like introduced the minors and set the prize pool, and they also have like a lot of influence on how these actually pan out. So you touched on Valve earlier on in this podcast and how that communication is an issue. Is there anything else that you think they should change in the way they approach the whole professional scene?
I mean, actually, I think like very overall, I think Valve actually does a pretty decent job. But it just seems to me like when there's such a big company that's making that amount of money, it just seems like just a simple thing as like hiring more people would improve a lot. Because sometimes when they make changes, it's way too late because people have already been complaining about like the pistols or whatever for a whole year before anything happens. Or some of these other issues like the smoke and the molly bug and some of these other issues that people are complaining about. Like, I'm obviously not a software developer or anything, but some of these issues just seems really easy to fix to me from the outside. And I don't know if it works that way, but it doesn't seem like Valve actually has a lot of employees for this bigger game, and they have to realize that people are actually making a living out of their game, so they have to take it serious. And I think the interaction with not only the community but also with the pro players is like pretty much non-existent. I mean, I've never spoken to Valve, I've never seen a Valve employee at an event. I haven't actually heard of. I mean, I know some of the Get Right and the really famous CS players have had some sort of contact with them, but I mean, personally, I've never ever seen a Valve employee. No idea what they look like. Like, are they even human? But you get my point. Yeah, exactly. You get my point. So I would actually just would like to see some more transparency and some more communication with the community, because I think it will actually. I can't see what harm it does to them, basically. I think it would only do good.
Do you sometimes feel like you're like the starving child looking into like the frosted window into a nice warm house, and that nice warm house has a label on the outside and it says Dota in big letters, and you're out in the tundra of the CS, the unloved CS orphan child? Is that kind of how you feel?
I mean, I always hear the comparison between Counter-Strike and Dota, but to be honest, I don't know anything whatsoever about Dota, so I actually can't compare the games because I don't know enough, and I don't really like commenting on stuff I don't actually know something about. But I mean, I can just see what's happening to Counter-Strike, and I think it's a game that gets too little attention. I mean, we get a new operation now that or something. That's pretty much it. I mean, I think you could improve the game on so many levels, like also just the matchmaking system. I don't know, the hitboxes. Just seems like you could do a lot of small changes that would make people really happy and like keep the motivation up for playing the game. Because you can also see now, like whenever a new game comes out, whether it being Overwatch or PUBG, that's everybody playing now, takes also a lot of players and viewers away from Counter-Strike, because the game is not getting updated frequently enough, at least. So that's also an issue. And viewers in the end is what makes us being able to be professionals in the first place, because they're the ones that attract sponsors, and if nobody was viewing a major, we wouldn't be playing. So it's that simple.
Valve has a very unique way of approaching updates and gathering feedback from the community. It does seem to have gotten a bit better lately. Like they address more specific requests and kind of have been tinkering with the pistols. How have you experienced some of the more recent changes to the game? Do you think this is a direction that Valve is going in the right direction of the game right now?
It's actually hard to say, because yeah, sure, they've changed some of the pistol, but it just seems like every time they rework a pistol, another one becomes OP, or the one they reworked were so OP, so we just find another pistol that was just as OP, but people just didn't realize it because they were using the even more OP one. So it's actually hard to say. I would like to see some more map reworks, or a whole brand new map coming into the map pool. Just to spice things up. I mean, sure, people will probably be complaining the first month or so, but I think just something new that you can sit on a server and go through some new setups and try and think out new tactics and so on makes the game not be so stale. So I think new maps is one of the easy ways to spice up the game and keep interest high. And also I think a whole new rework of the matchmaking system is something that would definitely get people back to playing, because if you had some sort of leaderboards or a rank above global or whatever it might be, I think it would actually make a lot of people come back from for example, playing Overwatch or Public Battlegrounds or whatever.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have seen a Dust rework of Dust 2 come out recently, and have you had a chance to play it at all, or do you have any thoughts on that?
No, actually not. I haven't even been into the map and just run around for myself. We've not had the time because we participated in ELEAGUE, so I actually haven't had the time to. But from pictures, it actually looks pretty good in my opinion. The only thing I don't like about Dust 2 is that it seems to me that they didn't change as much because it's such an iconic map, so they're afraid of messing with the home map of Counter-Strike basically. I would like to see some new rotations or maybe some skybox being opened up. I mean, I've always suggested that you might have a tunnel going from top mid and then into B tunnels, or the T-spawn side of tunnels, so you don't have to rotate from tunnels all the way through T-spawn sometimes, or some kind of new way on the map, because sometimes the map can get really stale. I mean, it's you play a default as T, you flash above lower to short, then you take short, then you do either a short rush where you just throw as many flashbangs as you can, or you split B, or if you have a good spawn you rush long. So it just seems like a really stale map to me, and I actually kind of like Dust 2 actually. I've always liked it decently, but I think they should maybe be a bit more daring in some of these reworks that they do.
Yeah, and back when the whole Dust 2 rework has been announced, a lot of pros and even the broadcast talent have been suggesting a lot of drastic changes, opening up skyboxes here and there, adding certain new parts of the maps, and it looks like you're kind of on that train as well. But from what I have seen, I look around on the map myself, and it just basically comes off as a graphical overhaul of the old map. So, but Valve has expressed that that this is not final, this is still a work in progress. We are changing it based on feedback. But am I right to assume that you think that it should still have a lot more changes before it can be let into the competitive map pool?
I mean, obviously it can already be let into the competitive map pool, because I mean, it's fine as it is. We've seen that previously as it is now, but personally, I would like to see more changes to the maps that they rework. I mean, I think a map they actually reworked really well is, for example, a map like Overpass. If you remember, like the first variety of Overpass was actually a pretty bad map, in my opinion. It wasn't balanced whatsoever, but that's actually turned out to be a pretty good map, in my opinion. That a lot of teams also play, and I think we've seen a lot of historical great games on Overpass. I also kind of like the Inferno rework, but the Dust 2 rework just seems like a graphical overhaul, like you just said, and I think it's just like, it's not good enough for me, in my opinion. I think they should be daring and like do something risky with the map without obviously removing the Dust 2 identity completely.
Let's just assume that they won't change anything. Like Dust 2 has been one of those maps where certain teams and certain players have been like historically good on it, like they had some like really good performances on it. And if like Dust 2 would be added back to the competitive map pool as it is right now, do you think that would like really shift the whole balance of the competitive scene? Like certain teams would become a lot better and certain teams would kind of like fall off a bit?
Actually, no, I don't think it would be anything drastical with like a top 10 team suddenly becoming a consistent top 3 team just because of one map. I don't think Counter-Strike works that way anymore. But obviously it would benefit the teams having their permaban, for example, removed. Let's say Cobblestone gets removed, that will obviously be a huge deal to Astralis or FaZe, for example. But otherwise, I think just will just benefit like the same old team that we saw before. So that's teams who like to lose to run a loose game. So I'm thinking of G2, for example, or people being really strong on the double orbs. So kind of like a FaZe or a really tactical team like Astralis, I think is going to benefit from this map. So, but I think Dust 2 is also a map that actually works kind of well for the underdog teams because it favors, like you can take a lot of aim duels on that map. But I'm actually unsure. I think I'll have to see the rework in play before I can make any like final judgments.
Yeah.
You just have to know that like Smith is sitting there behind G2 and he's like, yes, Dust 2 is coming back. I can play again. It's gonna be incredible. But we have we've been talking about overhauling the minor system, overhauling matchmaking, stuff like that. Some people, I think most notably Vugo recently, has kind of talked about kind of instituting a more common rotating map pool with less maps in the active pool at a time. Kind of, I mean, what do you think about that? And what do you think is really the ideal amount of maps that should be in the active map pool at a time?
So from what I could understand, in the beginning of CSGO, there was only a five map pool, right?
Yeah.
Only 5 maps.
Yep.
Yeah. I wasn't actually playing competitive back then, so I actually can't comment about it. I've never only a map pool that was consisting of 5 maps, so it's actually hard for me to say because I've never tried anything else than what we have now. But just from a personal point of view, I like the idea of trying something new. So before I've tried it, I don't want to dismiss it beforehand. Like, I would love to try it and see how it works out, and if that means that we can get more frequent reworks of maps or new maps being introduced, then I'm actually all for it, but I don't think it will happen.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think it was Torin and Richard Lewis who were talking about it in their show, that changing the size of the map pool would actually like really throw off the whole way the veto system works. And like, are you content with the veto system right now? Do you think that is something that doesn't need to be changed? Because like obviously like changing the map pool size will influence the veto system in the end.
Yeah, for sure. I think the problem that we have currently is that having 7 maps can actually seem a bit too much, because like mentioning teams that plays all 7 maps is nearly impossible. And I can just speak from a personal view from North, for example, or from Heroic previously, that it's actually almost impossible to having, but more importantly maintaining a 7 map pool, because it's like it's too much. When you have that many tournaments, you actually won't physically have enough time to practice all 7 maps on a regular basis, because like some prac days you have to go through let's say Mirage and Overpass, because you have to play them in Pro League the next day, and so on, and then you have another Pro League match the day after, and then you have another one on Sunday. So it's actually almost impossible to maintaining like a really deep map pool that consists of all 7 maps. And I think also you can see it from a lot of fans that's like asking pro teams or like criticizing them on Twitter, like, why don't you just start playing these 2 maps? And it's like, if it was that simple, I'm sure all teams would already be playing 7 maps. I mean, come on. I mean, for fuck's sake, it's like, it's almost impossible with the time we have that many tournaments going on. It's almost impossible to keep a 7 deep map pool.
Yeah, just going based off like experience, I don't think like Valve or even tournament organizers would like go that far to change the map pool size. So that just leads us to the conclusion that if Dust 2 will be re-added to the map pool, then one of the maps will have to go. And I know that this question is probably have been asked by almost each professional player by now, but which map do you think should like make room for Dust 2 if it gets reintroduced?
I think from my point of view, I think a map like Cobble or Nuke doesn't really like. They're the 2 maps that has a lot of issues. I think Nuke has a lot of like weird stuff on them, like ledges.
Even though you're Danish?
Yeah, even though I'm Danish, and even though Cobble is one of our best maps, but it's like, I think Cobble is way too stale. You have too little opportunity as a CT. There's just a lot of flaws with the map from my point of view, like after plan positions and so on. And I think Nuke has a huge problem with the sound at the moment. I mean, we're practicing and playing against Navi today, and it's like half the rounds when you're in like vent or upper B, you can't hear if they're going out through the door in upper or if it's out through the door in lower, and because of the verticality on the map. So those are the 2 maps that I want removed the most, even though we actually play them. But I could also see Mirage being removed just because it's so long time ago that they actually remade it. I think it's the oldest map that didn't, right?
Yeah, it's been around for a while now.
Like it's the map they didn't rework for the longest amount of time, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Because like Cash is not a Valve map, and Train they reworked. Now they reworked Dust 2, and both Cobble, Overpass, and Nuke are all maps that got reworked in the past. So that leaves us with Rush as the final one.
Yeah, and Cash did see some changes, I guess not from the Valve perspective, but
it did get like a graphic overhaul as far as I can remember. So I actually might see, like, even though nobody mentioned it, I could actually see Mirage going out, even though it would probably come as a big shock. But from previous history, Valve doesn't really give a fuck. So I would be surprised.
The running theme of every podcast that I'm involved in, Valve not giving a fuck. So you guys have EPICENTER coming up soon. Without going into too much detail and revealing all your secret strats, are you doing any sort of special prep for it, or is it kind of just business as usual?
To be honest, I think it'll be business as usual. We have a lot of stuff going on at the moment. We have Pro League matches, and we just got home from ELEAGUE 2 days ago, so I think we'll just be practicing and refining our tactics, and then we'll obviously have a look at our previous matches here at ELEAGUE and this week's of Pro League matches to see what we can work on. But I don't think you can change that much about your team or your map pool or your strategies when you only have from, like, what do we have, like 5 days from coming home from ELEAGUE? I mean, you can't expect teams to have something brand new up their sleeves every time when we basically have no time to practice. So I think it'll be going on the routine we have and trying to improve our game through looking at demos and just simply practicing the next few days before we take off.
So this question doesn't necessarily apply to you, but your teammates obviously took the win at EPICENTER last year when they were part of Dignitas. So do you think that they have any added kind of importance on this tournament defending that title, or?
Obviously, you always want to defend your title. I wasn't with them last year, but I think from what I can recall, every single player I talked to always gave me a positive, a positive view on EPICENTER as an event. From what I could understand, the venue was great, the hotel was great, the player treatment was amazing. So I'm actually just looking forward to a really good event, and it's also my first time in Russia, so I'm actually really looking forward to it.
Plus, you'll see me, so that's also a big bonus. Now,
it can be discussed, but yeah.
Right. So I think Tora mentioned like they actually gave you credit for your match against FaZe at ELEAGUE, because that's like one of the only times, like that's one of the few times where FaZe actually had to like fight for the victory, because they have been like steamrolling teams left and right nowadays, but you guys like brought the fight to them. So that kind of like shows that, do you feel like right now the team is in a good place? Like this is, because obviously there's always like room for improvement, but right now are you like satisfied with where the team is right now?
Yeah, I think so. We've been to two straight finals before ELEAGUE, and now we got another top 4, and we lost to the team that went on to win the tournament. So I think that's a really positive sign. Regarding the FaZe match, it was obviously a really close match. I think it was like 16-10, 16-12 or something on both maps. And we got into double digits, even though we lost all the pistol rounds. And also from just talking to the guys after the game, we had to like go over mistakes and so on. We actually came to the conclusion that we didn't play a great game, but we didn't make that many mistakes either. I mean, you just gotta give it to FaZe at the moment. And also, I think the pause killed us on Mirage. Like, we're not experienced enough, or we like handle it badly, because after the pause, people were a bit tilted and frustrated about the whole, like the client issues. And instead of just talking about what should we do next when the pause stops, we were all just a bit frustrated and zoned in, and it also didn't help. Like, this isn't bad wine, because obviously it didn't lose us the game, but MSL was sick as well, so he's a guy that's normally talking a lot and like being upbeat and obviously calls the strat, so him being sick and not on his best level didn't help us at all. But yeah, and losing 4 out of 4 pistol rounds versus FaZe and still getting to double digits is actually something we're pretty satisfied with. And after we've looked through our mistakes and tried to fix the game, I think I'm actually pretty confident in if we were to go up against FaZe again here at EPICENTER, for example. Be a good result overall, but FaZe is looking strong at the moment, no doubt.
So in your relatively young CS career, you've played with a series of Danish in-game leaders. So Snappy, Glaive, now MSL. Pretty much the only ones you've missed, I think, have been Hunden and Kerrigan, right? Can you just compare and contrast kind of the differences between those 3 guys and kind of what they bring to the game?
I mean, I've actually never played with Glaive when he was an in-game leader. He was like secondary in-game leading with alongside Snappy when we were playing in Heroic, but I think Snappy is a guy who's really good at coming up with strategies, and he's a guy that's really good at running defaults that works. I would say MSL is a bit more reactionary. Like, he's better at doing impulse calls and making like mid-game adjustments from my experience. But they both have their strengths and weaknesses, but I think they're 2 very different in-game leaders. And I also have to mention that you have to take into the consideration that Snappy wasn't actually originally an in-game leader before we played in Copenhagen, where nobody wants to in-game lead. So when we came into Heroic, he basically had to step up and take the role because nobody else wanted to, because Glaive wanted to focus on his own game. So I think if you look across the board on all top 10 teams at the moment, they all pretty much have in-game leaders who've done it for like 5+ years or something. And it's a role that you refine and improve on over time. So he's only done it basically for like 1.5 years. So I'm sure he'll keep on improving, and I'm actually pretty confident that in 2 or 3 years from now, you'll probably see him as one of the historically best in-game leaders in Denmark. So it's just a role that takes a lot of experience and responsibility, and I think he had to grow as a person a lot to get to the point where he is now, because MSL has done it for a much longer time than Snappy has. But they're both in-game leaders, but they're pretty different, I would say.
Just going into MSL a little bit more specifically, do you feel that you have found kind of like this leading figure that you want to follow? Like, is he Because a lot of in-game leaders are like, they are tactical geniuses, but they might not have the leading personality to like back up and rally the team. And MSL has been given a lot of credit by multiple analysts. Like, he is actually like someone who actually can get the team together and make them like do what is necessary. What is your whole viewpoint on MSL?
I think he's a great in-game leader. I mean, I've only played with the team for barely 3 months now, but I've had no bad experiences with him. I think he's really good at player management. He's really good at coming up with new stuff. He's also really motivated. Like, he's a guy that can stay up all night to like watch demos or come up with the new stuff. So he's a guy that's actually working hard and doing a lot to improve. So I'm actually pretty confident about the future, because I think we have a really solid team at the moment that can definitely reach top 1 if we maximize our potential.
Yeah, and a little bit more regarding MSL, because Torin and Richard Lewis were discussing, your game at ELEAGUE, and I think it was Richard Lewis who said that he kind of felt like maybe MSL was a bit overthinking things, and that is kind of what brought about the team's downfall. Do you think that's like a fair statement to make, or is there like more to the whole thing, the whole story?
You mean regarding vetoes?
A little bit, like, because what he said is that MSL tends to maybe overthink things sometimes, and that in the end hurts maybe his decision making or like the way he approaches things.
I think it's actually something that he tried to work on a lot, and I think he became way better at it. But I only played with him for like 3 months, so it's actually kind of hard to comment on at this point, because obviously if I'd played with the guy for like 2 years, it would be much easier to have a reference point. But I think regarding the vetoes, he's also being criticized on Twitter. I've seen from vetoes, and it's like, I don't really blame him, because when it's not only MSL who does the veto, it's like on our team, MSL, our coach Ruga, and Cajun, they all have a conversation and like a meeting on the hotel room the day before the game regarding vetoes, and then me, Config, and AC, we can obviously give our input, but we have no decision on the veto whatsoever. That's just the way we choose to do it, and it's actually working out fine. I think MSL just likes to like pick comfort picks, so he likes to choose the maps that we're strong on. And sure, you could look at the game versus FaZe and say that we maybe should have not picked Mirage and maybe picked something like Train that they would also be a bit uncomfortable on. But I mean, if you look at our Mirage game, we lost the CT pistol, or the T pistol, and we still got 9-6 at half, and then we like a 5-on-3 or 5-on-2 in the pistol round, and then we had the long pulse that kind of killed our momentum. So I think it would be a different game, and we obviously played a really close Mirage that could have just as well went into our favor. And the other 2 maps were Inferno and can't actually remember the last one. But point is that
Kabul?
no, not Kabul. But it doesn't matter. The point is just that like we like to pick our comfort maps, because we know that if we play our game and do the things that we went through before the game, we'll win no matter against what team. So I don't really think that he has a specific problem with vetoes, as it's been said on social media, for example. So it's not something I blame him for, and I don't actually think it's an issue from looking inside the game and actually playing with them.
To delve a little bit deeper into kind of your experience in the arc of your career, obviously you kind of had a very rapid ascent. You kind of went from playing in mixes at King of Nordique to being on Team X in a little bit over a year. So talk about kind of just how you perceive that entire journey. Like, does it still seem like it's real to you, or do you kind of wake up and pinch yourself sometimes and be like, there's no way this is my life, playing a video game for money?
Yeah, I think with my career, everybody, like, there wasn't actually a lot of expectations set towards me at any point in time, at least not up until Heroic. I think my career was like, obviously it's you or me who does the playing in the end. But I think I was just also a bit fortunate with some of my timing, because like when I went into Wolves and Heroic, it's a lot about knowing the right people in the scene and giving the right chance at the right moment. So let's say, for example, that the Copenhagen Wolves lineup had done great and had success as a team, they would have never needed me in the first place, if you know what I mean. So it's a lot about timing and playing good at the right moment. But I think the most important factor, apart from your skill, obviously, is your like social ability. You have to be able to talk to people and communicate well, and being like a well-liked and respected person in the community if you want to have a shot at playing at a top team. So if you're a guy that's known for raging or whining on forums or all these minor things that upcoming players might not think about, all the good players on the top teams that read these forums, they might not comment themselves, but they'll like take note of your actions out game as well, a lot actually, and that's these small things that actually decides in the end whether you can get to play on a top team or not. Because I've seen like upcoming players whining a lot about like that it's all about luck and ass licking and knowing the right people, and that might be true in some cases, but in general I think it's like finding your own game style, obviously playing good at the game and having good stats and all that shit, but in the end I think it's a lot about social ability. So being a nice person and being well liked and well respected, I think that's actually the most underestimated thing about making your road to the top of the CSGO world.
Yeah, speaking of climbing the ladder and kind of having a social presence, right? Obviously in Denmark, you guys have Dust2.dk, which is a branch of HLTV, which basically, I mean, it's a Danish news site, but it also focuses much lower on the Danish scene. That's been around for about a year now. Do you think that Dust2.dk has kind of contributed to the Denmark scene or the Danish scene and kind of consolidating it and giving it kind of, you know, something more to play for, like national pride sense?
Yeah, for sure. I think the Danish scene was already deep before Dust2 came about, but after Dust2 came, they've obviously just made a new gather system where, like, kind of like a Danish FPL, if you can say so, where all the top 10, 15 best Danish teams are invited. And that's something that gives a lot of competition and gives a lot of edge and motivation, for example, for some of the younger upcoming players. But they also have their own tournament structure where they run these monthly or weekly tournaments, where the lower ranked team can get a shot at having some matches on HLTV that can then lead into finding new sponsors and so on. But in Denmark, I think we're also fortunate that we have this many in-game leaders compared to other countries, for example. Yeah. So that's something that can cultivate a lot of new talent and motivate people to like in Denmark, I think we're the country where you can see like the structure of the teams the most. So you'll go from like starting to play with like some sort of in-game leader, like a little bit, you'll get the shot there.
Yeah.
Then when you play good there and some other team a bit higher up in the rankings will need a new player, they'll just look down and say like, okay, this player has been pretty good, and from what I've heard, playing with him on Face It or whatever, he's been pretty good, and like he's a nice guy socially, so they'll take him up and give him the chance. So I think if you're playing good in Denmark and have a nice personality and being like well liked in the community, I think it's actually not easy, but it's way easier compared to probably what it is in other countries. So if you're a good player, I would just give you the advice of keeping your attitude calm and always being positive. Like, because if you have that positive aura about you, you actually came a long way already.
So you're saying that the berries of the world are just as important as the Kerrigans and the Glaives?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, it's not a joke, because I think actually these in-game leaders could play on a way higher level than they do now. It's just because there's not that many star players to take from. Like, I'm sure if Barry had a Yuki and a Nico or someone else on their team, I'm sure they'd be in the top 20 or the top 30 right as we speak. But obviously there's only that much talent to go about, even in Denmark, so there obviously probably won't ever be enough star players for like 10 good Danish teams, but I think there will be these like 3 to 5 teams that will be able to compete on a decent level.
And talking about these in-game leaders, like what is your opinion on like Hunden's secession from the Danish scene, obviously not joining up with attacks? Do you think that might kind of influence like this whole inflow of talented young players? Because Hunden has been one of those people who actually had a great eye for young talent.
I actually think he just got tired of his good players being taken every half year or so. But I actually think he'll return to the Danish scene eventually. I mean, this whole attacks thing just seems to me like he wanted to try something new, and then maybe scout some German talent and see how far you can go on an international lineup. But I think he'll return to the Danish scene eventually, because like it's always more comfortable playing in your own language and with players you know. So I think it's just a matter of time before he'll actually go back to the Danish scene. But yeah, he's definitely one of the reasons why we have so many upcoming talents, along with Barry and these other in-game leaders that I also started playing with back in the days.
Yeah, interestingly, we saw Insta from Tricked kind of dabble with the German scene, I mean, way back in like 2014, and now obviously he's been playing back in Denmark for a while now. You know, I guess Hunden can hope that he has the same kind of career resurgence that Peter did when he returned from the motherland back to Denmark.
Now, being on the top of the Danish scene now, looking down to these lower teams, lower players, is there someone that you kind of like see yourself in him, like this young talented player who just needs to get his golden opportunity?
I think he doesn't need to get it right now, but I definitely think he'll get it at some point. I'll definitely say Stout from Fraxters. He's like this, I think he's like 15 or 16 or something, so he's not even old enough to play some of the big tournaments yet, but it'll definitely come in the future. And like, I think the playing style he has is very similar to my own. It's like, I think I've shifted my playing style a lot across the past year. But he's very aggressive, likes to take chances at the right times, and he's just a very confident guy that has great aim as well. So I think he'll go really far if he can like keep his head up and keep improving. And I'm talking to him every single land that I go to, like so Copenhagen Games. I had a long conversation with him and tried to give him some advice. So I definitely think if he just keeps on the right path and keeps like a positive spirit, he'll go a really long way.
This is where I kind of had to quiz you about the whole North Academy project, because they just brought in Borup, who has been considered as the chosen one of the Danish scene, but you know, still was with Hunden and Trade for a very long period of time, which kind of like made people forget about him to an extent. But now that he's on North Academy, do you think that they now have the 5 required to like break into like a consistent top 20?
Don't forget my boy Cyclone either. You know, they added him too.
I think the top 20 with this lineup might be pushing it a bit too far, but I definitely think they have some really interesting players. I actually think Mertz and Gel is some of the more interesting players for me personally on this lineup, because I see Gel is actually someone who has some of the sickest aim I've ever seen. Like he has the config type of aim, so if he can develop into being like maybe a more cerebral player that also plays smart when required, I think he'll actually come a long way as well. And Mertz is obviously a really sick talent, but still has a long way to go with like decision making and so on. But I think just being like a pure AWPer is something that's actually pretty rare. If you also look at other scenes, it's actually very rare that this pure AWP guy comes up that like it's just a role in CSGO that you cannot overlook. So guys like Boogie and Mertz, if they keep on improving, they're like destined to go far in my opinion, because they're so rare that if they get good enough, people just have to take them into consideration when they do roster changes. And also a guy like Cyclone is also really like, he's also very special in my opinion, because it's so few players who are that young that actually dedicates themselves into being a pure in-game leader.
Okay.
And I actually played with Cyclone myself on one of my first teams at Copenhagen Games in 2015, as far as I recall. I played on a mixed team with him back then with like Carnies from 1.6, and it was Cyclone and Vangså, who plays for Recent Gaming at the moment. Who's also a pretty talented Danish player in my opinion. So I've played with him myself, and I know he puts a lot of time into the game, like making strategies, and he cares about his role a lot. So I think there's definitely also a place for him in the scene in the future, because it's actually very rare to have a guy that's like only 21 or something that's dedicated himself into being a pure in-game leader. So I think he'll come along there as well.
Rest in peace, Carnies, by the way. Never forgot.
Yeah.
Another Danish player who's gotten a lot of attention kind of recently, and maybe not always for the right reasons. Not her fault though. Is Mimi formerly from Team Secret Dynasty, who now has left that team. I mean, she's kind of put it out there that she'd be willing to join up with a mixed gender team. I mean, what do you think about her as a player and kind of her mindset? Because it seems like her mindset definitely differs from some of her ex-teammates.
Yeah, I haven't actually played with Michaela that much, but just from her like listening to interviews and seeing her recent comments about moving on from her own team, I can just respect that a lot. I think every female who wants to go far in the has to realize that it can't happen on female-only teams. If you want to compete with the best, and if you want to play on the best teams, you have to start to mix the genders up and start competing with the males. And if that means she has to go down to the 20th best Danish team to do so, then so be it. So I actually respect that a lot, and I actually wish her the best of luck in the futures, because I think she's like set a prime example for other females to follow in the future, that it's not so dangerous and you can actually be well respected if you just take the leap and join a mixed gender team.
Yeah, we actually she was one of, if not the only female player participating in the European minor qualifier. So I mean, I definitely give her props. Dynasty was nowhere to be seen in the qualifier. You didn't see your you didn't see your team experts or any of the other European teams. In the Americas, we did have Dignitas and CLG Red participate, at least, falling out relatively early. But, I mean, yeah, I completely agree with you that the goal should be to be a top player, not be a top female player, because being a top female player is pretty much meaningless. It can get you a nice paycheck, but it's not going to get you respect. So kind of depends what you want in life, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's an entirely reasonable standpoint. Now, Valde, I want to ask you, is there anything else you would like to mention, bring up, or to discuss?
No, not really. I mean, it's been a fun interview, and yeah, appreciated having me here.
Yeah, man, definitely a huge thanks for conducting this with us at this early hour. Joe, perhaps anything else?
No, just want to say thanks to Valde for joining us, and keep watching this space for more exciting interviews with more exciting CS players.
You heard it, man. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you on the next episode.
Peace.